I think most people's goals with a planted aquarium is to get one to a point where you don't have to do anything to it. And so we're gonna talk about all that in today's video, go through, clean up the tank, and make this thing hopefully look cool again. Look, I was outside for 3 months doing rice fish stuff, and this tank just kind of chilled. It didn't get a lot of love. Our potato is, I think, at the end of its rope, you know, like it's growing into the window. It has been for a really long time. It's starting to lose quite a bit of leaves, as you can see. This thing is not squishy at all though, so I have a feeling that it could last a little bit longer. I don't know, not being able to operate my window is kind of annoying. I'm constantly picking up leaves, so I think we'll probably say goodbye to this thing. Oh, don't worry, we'll start a new one. Yeah, basically did nothing to this aquarium for 3, maybe 4-ish months. I think I did a handful, like maybe a couple water changes all summer. Not that we even probably needed to. I think I probably just looked over at the tank and it was evaporated down enough to where I was like, let's pull out, 15 gallons of water and then fill it back up. That was the extent of a water change. But we have a new big gourami male there in the back, and I just get the feeling that this isn't enough room for him. I mean, it's cool, he gets to swim in and out of plants and stuff, but there's just not a lot of open swimming room. So we need to get in here and take a lot of these plants out. The Pinnatophyta, despite not having any CO2, has just grown all over the tank, as well as my little, I don't even know what plant this is. It kind of looks like a dwarf sage, big variant, but I can't remember exactly what it is. A little bit of algae that we could clean up in here, and there's some annoying stuff on the back. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of it as we clean this thing up, but I think it's time to go through this aquarium that we did nothing to all summer and actually do something with it. First things first, put a towel down because you don't want to get yelled at, and I also have to make this carpet last at least another week. Here's also a reminder to check out the IG for the short form of everything you see here. We got to just cut this potato down. I don't think there's any way around it. I don't think there's any point in trying to save it. Like maybe we could do some cute stuff by putting it in a pot and putting it outside, but it's winter, so I think that's pretty much off the table. So we got to pull the roots out real slowly because some of them are down in the substrate. I was expecting this to be a lot harder, but it wasn't that bad. Our potato clip, made by the Pothocarry brand, did pretty well. It did exactly what I needed it to do. And oh look, there's ants on this potato, so I'm even that more glad that we're getting rid of it. I had to be extra careful with the roots once I noticed that they were growing into some of the Monte Carlo trees, so that did take a little bit extra time. Like, I eventually just got tired of trying to move this whole thing and decided to just cut the potato. I've been wondering for a long time how much something like this will impact the nitrogen load in the aquarium. Like, how good is it at absorbing things like nitrate? And after looking at this root system here, it's like, it has to do something, right? I think I finally have an answer to this. Some of you might remember we had a potato in the koi rice fish pond, but I took it out about a month ago because we didn't really have anywhere for the potato to grow. While that thing was in here, I was never able to detect any nitrogen. So no ammonia, no nitrite, no nitrate. And that doesn't exactly mean that those roots were absorbing nitrate. We actually can't tell what nitrogen species it was taking up, if any of them, just because we have stuff like a deep substrate and other things that can contribute to why there's no nitrogen in the little thing that we have. But as soon as I took that thing out, fast forward a few weeks, now I'm able to detect nitrogen in this thing. Let's find a test strip here so I can show you. Dip it in here for a few seconds and then let it rest for about a minute. Let's check for some eggs while we wait. There's a couple on a few of these mops. Like, the rice fish aren't putting out nearly as many eggs as they were in the summertime, and I think that's just because the temperature in here is not quite optimal. Like, we need to raise it up a little bit. So I might actually put a heater in this while we're at it. My light is running for about 18 hours. So they should have all of the signals from the light source that it's time to breed, but I think we do need to get the temperature up a little bit. Anyway, this isn't a rice fish video, don't worry. So this might be hard for you to see because my camera sucks, but there is some light pinkiness on the nitrate. No nitrite. I feel like a few weeks ago I did see a little bit of nitrite. That's why I threw those bio rings in there. So that's obviously been working to create a little bit more surface area so the bacteria load can increase to handle that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the potato maybe is involved in sucking up nitrogen. It kind of looks that way, at least. It's just impossible to know if it's favoring ammonia and then that's why we didn't see any nitrogen at all, or if it was just handling like the nitrite and the nitrate, or all three. I mean, there's no way to know for sure, but I think in kind of the back of my mind, I always knew that the potato had to be doing something with the nitrogen in the water. It was just really hard to classify and like tell exactly what it was doing, and we still don't know, but I think it is safe to say that if you do the potato thing and you don't let it get all weird and mushy and contribute to nitrogen accumulation, then it probably does grab a little bit of it. I know there's at least one person yelling at me right now. It's not a potato. I know it's not it's way more fun to say potato. This is actually an organic white yam. And if you go to the grocery store, you can pick out any type of yam and put it in water and it will send out some shoots. But you might not have 100% luck with this. So if you're going to do it, I recommend getting at least 3 of them, put them in water, and then at least one of them should work. I think the main reason why we were able to have air quotes success with this tank all summer is because we didn't do anything to it. Like, it did get a little out of hand, but again, water quality was great. We didn't have to do any water changes. We just let nature do its thing. It got a little overgrown, but we'll touch back on this here in a little bit. Man, that really makes the room feel empty. That's gonna take some time to get used to. Ew, I don't like it. We need another potato already. There's such a huge space here where nothing grew because that root system was so big. But we needed to do it along with the maintenance that we're about to do, getting everything cleaned up in here, pulling a bunch of plants out. We also need to go through and trim some of the bamboo and the potho plants that have some yellow dying leaves for whatever reason. When it's all said and done, I think we just needed to do it. We can always grow another one, and I think I probably will based on just how empty all this feels. I just really liked coming downstairs and having this like wild thing growing all over the room. So we'll start another one, don't worry, but let's get to this tank. Let's make this thing look way better. Without a doubt, we needed to do a bunch of work to this aquarium. We let it get just too far gone. So that meant pulling out a bunch of the Pinnatifida that was spreading all over the tank. You can see this is kicking up some stuff. And that's going to be one of the main catalysts for why this tank totally fell apart after I did this. A little foreshadowing for you. So got through, did half the tank. We had a little bit of algae in the aquarium, but it wasn't bad. It was a manageable amount. And I think that's partially just because the tank was so stable. The plants were doing their thing. You know, how much the potato had an influence on it, I don't really know. I don't think it's really possible to ever know that, but the tank was good before the potato was there, so I don't think it had a huge impact on the system, but you never know. One of the positives of letting a tank get overgrown and then doing something about it is that you get a bunch of free plants most of the time. I had to go through with a toothbrush, get some of the algae that was in the hair grass, but again, point of this is that it wasn't that bad. Little flipper scraper action on the back glass. You know, we got that green spot over here, so always got to get rid of that when the opportunity arises. Try not to bust any of the trees while we do it. And this is one of my favorite techniques for getting rid of junk in your aquarium. Just get a tube. No big siphon head on there or anything. This is going to make your siphon super fast, but you can also scoop up your fish with this pretty easily, or even a rock like you'll see me do. So got to be careful with it, but it's really effective at just getting stuff out of your tank if that's what you need to do. So it was at this point I had a decision to make. We have some algae here on the Monte Carlo trees. What I should have done, man, hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? I should have just trimmed this off. But instead, I decided to go a different route, and that route was not the right way to go. So you can learn from my mistakes here, okay? Hydrogen peroxide is a fairly safe way to get rid of certain types of algae. I decided to go with spraying these portions of the trees. And so if you do it like this with the water level down, and you just don't go super heavy on it, most plants can take this, and the algae will not. We started to fill the tank back up after that little bit of treatment. Here's a tip for getting the temperature perfect on your python. Go into your sink, let a little bit dribble out into a jar, and then hit that with a thermal temperature gun. That way you know you're not putting in super cold or super hot water. Now it's time to add in the legendary Fritz Pond Guard, even though I don't have crazy high chlorine levels, but I still add this stuff anyway because it can only benefit the fish, it can only benefit the water, and you never know when the city's going to turn the chlorine way up. Even before the tank was done filling up, we can start to see the effect of the hydrogen peroxide on the algae, and it's looking like it's starting to work. So at this point, I'm super optimistic in that we just did everything perfect for our aquarium, and 1 month later, we have some major problems. But here we are 1 month later, and everything fell apart. So from afar, it looks pretty good. You can't really tell there's not that much of a difference, but if you zoom in and actually pay attention to what's going on in the tank, the algae is all over the place. And most of it is a worse type of algae that's even harder to remove. So this wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but I think this is a prime example of when you go in and change things, you can have a big dramatic effect on the tank. Even if they don't seem like they're huge changes, or if the changes are, you know, you have good intentions behind them, like removing algae, removing plants that are kind of messing with things. it can still have a big impact on the overall ecosystem. And I think on top of all of this, I did mess with the light fixture. So the ONF Light app is kind of wonky, and I'm pretty sure I had this thing running at 100% instead of the 50%, which it was normally on, for like at least a week before I figured out what was going on. So that definitely did influence what has taken place in the tank with the excess weird algae growth, but I fixed that relatively soon, and even though it's back down to lower power, we're still having like this crazy problem. And at this point, I mean, we're pretty much like, we have two choices. We can either do a big dramatic trim, or we can start over. This probably isn't the best example of a tank where you can set it and forget it. I was trying to achieve it with this one, but I have a way better example in Legit Fish Food headquarters. And that's of course the big tank in there. So that's an aquarium that we also set up about a year ago. I haven't had to do very much of anything to this aquarium. It's slowly evolved over time, but we set it up with that intention, and we were luckily able to achieve it here. Focusing on a low light tank here with not a ton of fish. They don't get fed, 7 times a day or anything. Sure, it helps that we feed them a really good food that doesn't have a lot of waste left over once it's passed through the fish, but I think the big important thing here is just the biomass of the plants relative to the water volume, and then of course that light source being very limited. It's super dark in the corners of this tank. My camera does a pretty good job, actually. It's kind of surprising that it actually makes it look so bright, but it's very dark in the corner. You can see that here with some of the Java ferns not growing really at all. That's how low the light is, and I think that's really helped. Obviously, we have a bunch of floating plants on the top here. That's contributing to bringing the lighting down even lower, and then also being a nutrient sponge. But there's trade-offs to this. So yes, we don't have a tank that we have to have our arm in all the time. It's not a tank where I have to do a ton of water changes. I hardly do any water changes to it at all. But on the flip side, the dwarf sage down at the bottom isn't really growing. It doesn't have enough light. There's probably 5 par down here tops. It looks like we do actually have a little bit of cyanobacteria down here on the dwarf sage, but this has probably been here for a while. Like, it's not the start of a problem or anything. Sometimes little things like this pop up. They come and they go, and that's just another benefit of having a tank that is really stable from like a nutrient and algae and light perspective. And the Java fern also is not going to be doing a ton of growing either. So it's very much a static scape. It's one where I set it up to where I really like the way it looks, and I'm happy with it looking relatively close to that for a super long time. But that's specific to that tank. I know that's not everybody's favorite thing to do. Everybody has a different goal in mind when they set up an aquarium. Some people love to trim plants. They love to watch and be able to tell that there's a progression going on. But this was just a tank that I didn't feel like that was important to me. That's what this tank was supposed to be, right? Like one that we watched from the beginning. Here's a picture of when we set it up, and this thing was awesome, and I was really excited to see the Monte Carlo grow. As I've set up a tank like this before, and I just love watching that develop over time. Watching the trees turn into actual trees is really cool. If you really want to set up a planted tank that's not going to require very much work from you, and it's going to stay kind of perfect-ish, right? Like, there's always going to be little things you might have to get involved, but if you want to set one up that has minimal work, I think you should focus on keeping the lighting really low, choosing plants that can handle that low light environment. So things like Java fern, like Anubias. You're gonna wanna stay away from things like CO2 and adding a bunch of fertilizers, but that kind of goes hand in hand with not having to do extra maintenance and things like that. So that kind of fits perfect. I don't think substrate matters too much. Like, I've done these types of aquariums with active substrates that do have nutrients in them, and I've done them with ones that just have sand. And then just keep the fish load low. Keep that bio load at a minimum. Don't be feeding a ton of food all day either. Even if you have a few fish, if you're just dumping food in there, it kind of negates that. So go light on the fish, go light on the light, and go specific with the plants. Do a little bit of research. I gave you just a couple that are out there, but there's definitely a lot more. But look, with this tank, with where it is right now, no amount of water changes is gonna save this thing. Like, we're not gonna be able to put a dent in this. We have to go for physical removal, and we might even put in some algicide too, because this is kind of a D-Day situation. I really don't wanna set up the whole thing again. I don't wanna start fresh. I don't wanna buy like $400 of Monte Carlo to try and replant this all. So that leaves us with only one option, and that is physical removal. I haven't wanted to ever do this, but it might be a cool learning experience, so I'm gonna do it. I'm getting nervous just thinking about it. Oh, we gotta do it. All right, I only slightly overreacted here. Okay, I guess in my head I thought that after trimming these things, they would all be completely yellow, but it turns out I was able to get most of the algae out of here without doing too much damage to everything. You can see some areas I had to really get in there and hack a bunch out, but it still doesn't even look that bad. I don't know why I was freaking out so much. I mean, I wasn't able to get everything, and this will probably be sort of a continuous process, right? Like, I'll be in here probably a little bit later today, but I just had to do so many water changes to this thing, definitely changed the complete volume of the tank. Just like siphoning out all the junk that ended up and, you know, algae that was hiding in the back. So I don't want to do too much more of that today. I think this is pretty much going to wrap up the maintenance that I'm going to do. I got the CO2 turned back on because that's going to be the key to getting the Monte Carlo to grow. Double checked everything with the light. This is the level that we're going to leave it at. So it's not 100%. I think it's sitting around like 60 or 70. Hopefully that's a good match for it all. But I still have the problem of my hair grass. So there's a couple different options. I don't want to take, I hate to rip stuff out, but we're kind of at that point. Unless we can kill this algae, there's no way to physically remove it without taking the plant with it. So I think I'm gonna use the algae clean out. I've used this stuff before. It doesn't look, it's not a copper-based algicide, but it's still kind of a nasty thing, right? Any chemical that you're putting in the tank that kills something that's alive isn't gonna be great. But I've used it before on this tank to get rid of, I think, kind of a similar type of algae. It was so long ago, but it does work. Not sure if it's gonna work on this particular type of algae, but I know it probably kind of, cross your fingers, should help with preventing the stuff that was growing on the Monte Carlo. So, I mean, that's the main reason for using it. We don't have any shrimp or anything that should be sensitive to it, and hopefully this is just like a 1 or 2 time thing, and then we never have to do it again. Sometimes these little Band-Aid fixes can help and prevent a problem from coming back. Not all the time though, and so that's definitely a cycle that you don't want to get sucked into, having to put chemicals in your tank to maintain the look of it, but just a one-time thing, right? Like, I think it's okay. This stuff, it's just a cap that's gonna do 60 gallons, which is roughly what our tank is. I just wanna make sure that we're not overdosing it on accident. That would be bad, but if we underdose it, that's okay. You can also take that approach. I've done that before in the past where, it says this is a dose, do half of it if you're worried about it. So we'll see if that has any effect. We should know in the next day or two if it's gonna start to work, and if it does, then great. If it doesn't, then we will just probably pull this out. And we need to do some replanting anyway. So that's kind of, I do have a little bit of motivation for pulling most of all of this out because it's all pretty much affected, except for the areas over here. But it's a lot of hair grass. Like, if we want to fill this out and kind of get, some stuff back here and back here, maybe take some more plants out, then I don't know. We'll probably we'll save that for another day. So now we just have to sit back and be patient, hope that everything that we did today and kind of part of yesterday, this turned into a 2-day thing, was enough to create an environment where things can be successful. So the Monte Carlo can start growing again, we can get the effect on the trees that we want, and then that in turn is going to help to inhibit the amount of algae. Hopefully we have the lighting correct, and everything else about the tank just makes for the environment that we want to have. And if what I just said kind of sounds like we're winging it, it's because we kind of are. Like, a lot of this aquarium stuff is winging it to a degree. I mean, we obviously go into it like we have a plan and we kind of think we know what we're going to do. We have an action that we can take, but we really don't know if it's going to do anything. And so, at least for part of me, that's part of the fun of the whole thing. If I knew what was going to happen every time I set up an aquarium or every time I went in and did maintenance on a tank or tweaked things, then I don't think it would be as engaging, at least for me. But yeah, guys, I think that's pretty much all I got for today. We did a lot, and if you're having issues with your tank, just try and be as patient as you can. Take a step back, take a breath, and just let nature do its thing, man. Like, sometimes it'll surprise you and it'll do exactly what you want.